It is currently 9:30 on Monday night, and Vaught-Hemingway Stadium is without its goalposts because of what happened this weekend. Ole Miss takes care of business against Georgia. We messed up our picks. We were wrong. We were beyond wrong. And how in the world were we beyond wrong? Georgia, they flopped on their face. Carson Beck flopped on his face. Ole Miss, even without Trey Harris, absolutely demolishes Georgia. I mean, in a surprising outcome. Gray, number one, on the surprise scale, 1 to 10, how surprised are you with Ole Miss winning this game? And 2, go ahead and break down what happened with Georgia and how they lost this game.
Surprise scale, probably 9.7, because I was not expecting this at all. I was not expecting the type of performance from Ole Miss. I was definitely not expecting this type of performance from Georgia. But that 0.3% out of the 9.7 is not surprised because of what I've seen from Georgia in the past. I've seen them get exposed. It was just about, can a team expose them for 4 quarters? And honestly, no team has exposed them yet for 4 quarters. Even with their loss in Tuscaloosa, yes, they were exposed in the first half, but they came out in the second half and got back in that game, actually took the lead at one point before the big Ryan Williams touchdown. And they were exposed a little in the beginning of the Florida game and maybe some in that Texas game. And here and there, every once in a while, they've shown how they can be beat. But Ole Miss did it. Ole Miss completed for a full game. A heck of an atmosphere at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium is something that you don't really say often. That's not a big-time atmosphere or a big-time stadium to go play, but Lane Kiffin has got that place in a perfect spot, and it's exciting to watch. So let's take a look at the stat sheet here. All right, so let's just take a look at the stat sheet. It shows, I mean, I could literally point to one number here on this stat sheet, Nathan, and it's the exact reason that Georgia was not able to just go in and handle Ole Miss. Georgia has always been able to run the football. All Kirby Smart Georgia teams have been able to run the football, even if they didn't have a superstar running back like a Nick Chubb or Sony Michel or somebody like that, or even a James Cook. They've always been able to establish a ground game and let that open everything up on the offensive end and then stifle people on the defensive end. 1.8 yards a carry on 33 carries. You want to know a recipe of how to lose a game on the road in the SEC? That is exactly it. Especially when Carson Beck has not been the type of player we were expecting him to be this year. He has not been able to get Georgia over the hump and out of games or win games that they didn't play well enough. Georgia's whole offensive scheme, just like I was mentioning earlier, it has always been run the ball, establish that you can get 6 yards a carry no matter who is running the ball, whether it's a wide receiver on a jet sweep, whether it's a running back going off left tackle, whether it's a halfback dive, whether it's an option play, no matter what. Establish that you can do that, and then open everything up and move the ball, and don't let teams score over 20 points. And that's exactly how Georgia has had so much success, even going back to 2015, 16, 17, right when Kirby Smart got there. And even when Mark Richt was there, that's how Georgia won games. You remember the Todd Gurley years? My goodness. That's how they won games. But Georgia was not able to do that in this game. You credit Pete Golding and Lane Kiffin for the incredible defensive game plan that they had against this Georgia offense. And then, just like what they were able to do on the offensive end without their star receiver, Trey Harris, and with Jordan Watkins a little beaten up. We didn't know if he was going to play in this game. He ended up going and having a tremendous impact. Georgia's defense, especially in the secondary, got exposed in this game. It's not like Jackson Dart or even their backup Austin Simmons. They didn't throw for 500 yards like they did a week ago against Arkansas. They didn't have the typical Ole Miss 49 points in a game. But drive after drive after drive, the middle of the field was wide open against this Georgia defense. It's just something that you haven't seen against a Georgia defense in years. And it's honestly I'm concerned for the Georgia offense. I'm concerned for Georgia moving forward, even though their path to the playoff is obviously still there, still available. If you finish 10, if you win out, but big game against Tennessee coming up. We'll talk about that here in a moment. But huge win for Ole Miss, able to get this one done.
Yeah, it almost felt like a must-needed win for Lane Kiffin and this Ole Miss program. So many times that they've been put in this scenario and really just not been able to meet the task at hand. But it was a perfect scenario, like we've said. Having Vaught Hemingway Stadium be as loud as it was, to have every single fan be tied into the game as they were, really benefited Ole Miss. In ways we haven't seen before, because Vaught Hemingway Stadium isn't traditionally known as a really tough place to play in the SEC. Like you said, credit to Lane Kiffin and Pete Golding. Fantastic game plan on both sides of the ball, really. I really wanted to touch on Ole Miss's defensive line. Controlled the line of scrimmage. Absolutely dominated the Georgia offensive line, whether it be in run control, stuffing people at the line of scrimmage, or if you want to talk about passing downs, they were in the backfield. They lived in the backfield. Carson Beck was pressured so many different times. He had forced fumbles, just a whole bunch of stuff happening. And that really just got to credit him. It's an insane thing to happen. But you talk about Georgia on the offensive end. You don't establish a running game. That is the one thing I was confident that they would at least attempt to do. And it's like they tried to, and then they saw in the second half it wasn't working, and they went away from it. Carson Beck continues to struggle in the middle of the field. Saw multiple throws that really came close to being picked off. He did have one interception off a tip pass. That's really not something I would really put against him, whether that ball was good or not. But I think it really comes down to the play calling. Mike Bobo really struggled, especially in the second half when Georgia was down. They were having to fight back. Some of the play calls I did not agree with. Really tried to keep it short and didn't really take any big shots downfield, whether that be because Carson Beck has struggled to complete those in the past few weeks or not. I don't know. But you want to be a team like Ole Miss, you're going to have to hit some big plays every now and then. It was a weird start to this game. Jackson Dart throwing a pick, he gets injured. Georgia takes a 7-0 lead, and I really thought it was going to be one of the scenarios that Georgia goes ahead and takes advantage of the turnover they're given. They went ahead, scored off it, and then there's the momentum. They're going to go ahead and take this game and run away with it. Well, their defense was not able to stop Ole Miss backup quarterback, who absolutely drove them down the field. Fantastic drive. It ties the game up 7-7. Ole Miss's defense comes out, gets a stop, gets their offensive ball back, and suddenly Ole Miss is the one with all the momentum again. Even with that turnover, I thought one of the keys to this game for Ole Miss to win was the fact that they would play a perfect game. Didn't have to be perfect. They took care of business. Yeah, and I will say this about Georgia moving forward. They had to find some sort of identity on the offensive end. It has been too long this season that they have tried to do different things every single week. And it has caught up to them in this game. You have Tennessee at home next game. Tennessee is not a slouch of a team. They can put up points. They are very good on the defensive end as well. If you want to make the playoffs, still, you're going to have to figure something out on the offensive end. As far as defense goes for Georgia, you got dominated. The middle of the field was wide open. I don't know what the secondary was doing. Every single time it just busted coverage. Jackson Dart throwing some of the easiest balls you could ever see. It just had people wide open. Jordan Watkins, fantastic receiver, even with him being a little banged up. It was like he didn't miss a step for the Arkansas game. I don't know, bro, how Georgia can afford this type of loss and still have enough momentum to go and win out the rest of the way, especially with the task they have coming up next week. It's a hard thing to swallow, especially as a Georgia fan. You really haven't experienced this many losses in the regular season since 2020 when you lost to Alabama and Florida. And I think that was a little bit more respectable. But it's Georgia's in a tough spot. You still got 3 weeks of the regular season to go, and they're not easy. Carson Beck going forward, he's got to figure something out on the offensive end. I don't know if Georgia needs a quarterback change or not. At this point, I would say no. Everyone keeps referring to Carson Beck as this first-round quarterback talent. I haven't seen it this past season. It felt like he has regressed a whole bunch. There has been no one really stepping up as a playmaker for Georgia on the offensive end. No wide receiver really dominant. Love it. It's not really stepped up the way I thought he would in these games. And they don't really have a true wide receiver one. The loss of Lad McConkey and Brock Bowers, it has loomed huge on the Georgia offense. And without that running game, they don't have really any safety net. So someone has to step up on the offensive end for Georgia. And this Georgia defense has to really lock down and get it figured out, because Nico Iliava will pick them apart across the middle, just like Jackson Dart did.
No doubt. No doubt. And to your point, Tennessee's not any slouch of playmakers, just like Ole Miss isn't. Ole Miss, even with being banged up, they are fantastic at the playmaker spot, and Dart is the perfect quarterback to get it to them, especially over the middle of the field. If they can't guard the middle of the field, they are in trouble against a Josh Heupel and Tennessee offense, because I know that game's at home, and we'll talk about that in a second. But if they can't stop Jordan Watkins and Lee and Bentley and those guys for Ole Miss without Trey Harris, they're not going to be able to stop Brew McCoy and Squirrel White and Nico getting it to those guys. And then you have to worry about Dylan Sampson as well, and then the type of pass rush that Tennessee has. I think the task at hand is going to be a major, major issue for Tennessee.
Well, I believe the path is pretty much clear for Ole Miss the rest of the way. Win out, take care of your business. I think you're probably going to end up with a playoff spot, especially with your big wins. Now for Georgia, it's a little different. You have a hungry Tennessee team coming into town this weekend. You're coming off a tough loss at Ole Miss. How do you refocus your mind and really focus on the task at hand if you're Georgia to get ready for Tennessee, who's definitely coming in hungry?
Man, it is going to be really hard. I think the point that you mentioned about Georgia finding an offensive identity has got to happen. Otherwise, they'll lose to Tennessee and be out of the playoff, because the Tennessee will pick them apart. Tennessee's going to be able to watch this Ole Miss, what Ole Miss was able to do, what Lane Kiffin and that offensive staff was able to draw up for against Georgia, as well as what Alabama was able to do to Georgia a couple of weeks ago, and what Florida was doing to Georgia before DJ Lagway got hurt and they had to shorten their playbook. If you don't find something offensively to help your poor defense, you're not going to win a game against Ole Miss scoring 10 points. You're not going to win a game on the road in the SEC scoring 10 points. If you score 10 points against Tennessee on Saturday, even in Athens in Sanford Stadium, you will lose. And we will pick you to lose if you score 10 points in our preview of that game. But being able to run the ball has got to be the step forward for Georgia. Carson Beck is not going to win you football games. I'm not saying he's a game manager. I'm not saying he's not a comparable quarterback. I'm not saying that he's an NFL quarterback. I will never say that. What I also am saying, though, is when he had playmakers around him that stepped up, like Lad McConkey and Brock Bowers, and when he was able to establish the run last year, when Georgia was able to establish a run, they had success, no matter who they were playing. It didn't matter. They were really, really good. And the first time they weren't able to run the ball last season was the SEC championship game against Alabama. And they lost. Going back to my point, talking about how Georgia's got to run the ball, that's what Kirby teams have always done. Go back and look at Georgia's rushing stats the last 7 years. In the games that they've had success and the games where they've not had success. If they've got 2 digits for their total rushing yards at the end of the game, they've lost. That's how it has always been under Kirby Smart and at Georgia. they've always been able to run the ball really well, even if they don't have a superstar. They've got to get back to that.
That's exactly right. It really feels like they've taken a huge step back since a win at Texas. It really feels like we've taken a huge step back with the picks we missed. I mean, credit to Ole Miss. They proved us wrong. And I believe we also took the over in this game, which Georgia really didn't help out. Yeah, it didn't really work out. But there's a learning curve, I guess. But I mean, credit to Ole Miss. They took care of business. They're an exciting team to watch. And we'll have – honestly, this makes the rest of the season so much more exciting because it's so tight, because there's so much disparity in what has gone on. But I guess we'll have to see and wait for next week for some big showdowns, especially Georgia-Tennessee, which will probably end up being the game of the week, in my opinion. Yeah. All right. Thank you all for watching Fan to Fan Sports.